Green Party spokesperson for Health, Social Care and Public Health, Pallavi Devulapalli, was suspended from the party just days before the beginning of conference for comments she made at a general election hustings event when answering a question about hate crimes against the LGBTQ community. Speaking on Twitter, she said, "I received an email from the Green Party on Wednesday, the 4th of September, telling me that a temporary no-fault suspension had been enacted against me, and this meant that I would not be able to attend the Green Party conference or represent the party on social media until the matter is resolved. This decision was taken on the basis of a complaint based on a hustings I attended more than 2 months ago, where the complainant was not satisfied with my response to a question about transphobia and felt I should have stated the party position on gender self-ID in my response." At no point prior to issuing the temporary no-fault suspension did anyone from the party attempt to contact me to ask me to clarify my remarks or let me have the site of the complaint. So this came out of the blue, and I was left struggling to understand the rationale for it. I'm feeling hurt, disappointed, and upset at this turn of events. It feels like a punishment without a trial and goes against any law of natural justice. Now, she was answering a question on how candidates could and would help the members of the LGBTQ plus community feel safe in light of increases in hate crime, and the chair at the hustings had coupled this with a question on women's rights and women's spaces. So what exactly did she say? Well, luckily for us, she posted a link to the hustings on her Twitter.
I've yet to meet anyone who actually says that somebody shouldn't have the right to be addressed as they please, to dress as they please. And I really think there's something mischievous in the air to make this out to be an issue, when really I've really yet to meet anyone. I meet a lot of people every single week. Everybody's happy for people around them to live as they please. Rights based on how you choose to dress or call yourself shouldn't even be a thing, and I don't think they are. The confusion arises when people start conflating sex with gender. Sex-based rights are important. We need to maintain that distinction, and I speak here as a GP. Biology is a real thing. It's not a belief to say that, female sex is different to the male sex. And there's nothing wrong in accepting that, of course, there are some people who fall between the two, but they are very, very few and far between. There has been something strange in the air about the way we've seen a mushrooming of people wanting to change gender. And the CAST review has actually shone such beautiful light on it. And I felt proud to be British when that report came out. Because what Dr. Cass did was undergo a thorough study for 4 years to actually lay bare how toxic the atmosphere had become, to the extent that healthcare professionals had become terrorized into not being able to speak freely and give young people the care that they deserved, the holistic care that they deserved. So all their other needs, their mental health needs, their neurodivergent needs, all of them were being put to one side as soon as they expressed confusion around their gender. We need to respect what Dr. Cass has done and follow that review 100%. And as a society, let's move forward in a united way.
Helena, is there something mischievous in the air? And what do you make of her comments?
What's frustrating to me is that I think, whilst I disagree with the vast majority of what that she said there, and I think a lot of these are misdirections in terms of how the discussion has gone, I don't think anything she said is necessarily worthy of suspension. It's not like she's being more diplomatic than we've seen a lot of gender critical types be, but there are plenty of responses that you can give to what she said to show why what she's saying is basically a load of nonsense. Especially when she says, "Oh, we should support the CAST review 100%." Everybody should know, really. You don't just take one person's opinion and then treat it as rote. You put what the judgment that they've made. You view it in the round. You view it with regards to how every other different person or different medical body has decided to adjudicate on this, and then you take a light of all of that evidence, and then you try and be able to find some position that marries all of these things together. Trying to take one person's view on this as somehow the defining point of view that everybody should adhere to is how you manufacture groupthink. There have been plenty of places that have called out the CAST review, such as the BMA, places, things published in the Lancet as well, There's been wide-scale criticism of the approach that she took. Now, the conclusions of the Cass review, the recommendations that she gave, none of these things were they weren't necessarily too far out there in terms of things she was saying, like how we deal with service provision, how we deal with the amount of people who get referred, and how we try and ensure that we have a holistic level of treatment. I don't necessarily disagree with a huge amount of these things, but the way in which this is being used as some kind of gender critical smoking gun is completely nonsensical. The way the BMA criticized it for being allowed to be as a scapegoat to be able to push through legislation that wasn't even in the recommendations quickly and expediently without proper critique and proper viewing within the full context, that is a problem. As far as she said, oh, there's something mischievous going on, she referenced like the level of hate crime. Like, this fundamentally to me is somebody who doesn't live in the real world. The official statistics show that anti-trans hate crimes have increased by 11% in this country from the year 2022 to 2023, which is an increase on the previous year as well. If it was any other demographic group, and you said, I don't believe there have been these increase in hate crimes against, black people or whatever. I don't believe in these increase in hate crimes against women, things that have been increasing and are also really bad, right? Then no one would ever be able to give this response without being called out. And this idea as well that, well, I don't meet people think you shouldn't be able to dress how you want to dress. First of all, women get told how they should dress all the time. That's something that's unique about kind of the patriarchal it's a society that we live in, that people get judged on the way that they dress. That's just not real at all. And second of all, the issue for trans people, of course, we would like to be referred to how we want to be referred to. We'd like to be able to dress the way we dress without being criticized. That doesn't happen regardless anyway. But on top of that, the actual real problem is about legality. It's our access to healthcare. It's our access to fundamental different rights and the way in which we should be protected from discrimination. This is where the crux of the legal argument comes to. So whilst I think that maybe a suspension was a little bit of a jumping of the gun here, rather than looking at things more as a way in which we can try and cool the debate down, which I don't think this does. The fundamental points that you were making don't have any basis in reality and should be discussed fully, and she should be allowed to engage rather than just being point blank suspended. Because the Green, one last point on this one is that the Green Party did try and do a suspension of a previous member, Shara Ali, over far more kind of transphobic comments, in my opinion, that he'd made, and they had to go through legal proceedings for this, and they found in favor of Shara Ali, not because they necessarily couldn't adjudge somebody to not be relevant, not be welcome in the party because of their political views. It actually ruled that you can get rid of people who don't fit in with the broad party's political viewpoint. That's what political parties are for, people who broadly share the same kind of ideological viewpoint. But he won based upon the fact that they didn't go through the proper ways of going through a disciplinary process, and it was extrajudicial, if you want to use a loose term, in how that they did it. So I think they should need to be careful with how they approach these things and try and bring people in rather than just suspending people willy-nilly.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting that you brought that up. Obviously, this isn't the first example of someone being suspended from the party over quote-unquote gender-critical views. When I arrived in Manchester, to Manchester Central on Friday, I was immediately met by a group of protesters, mostly women, who call themselves Greens in Exile. And I spoke with one of them, Mandy, and this is what she had to say.
When it comes to what is now called the sex and gender issue, I disagree with gender ideology. Which I see as being saying that a person's gender ideology, a person's gender identity determines whether they are a man or a woman, a girl or a boy, male or female. I disagree with that. From my own 69 years of experience, that is not the case. But I've always advocated for anybody to live their life however they want, identify with whatever they want, dress however they want, whatever job, perform, and etc. So we have a problem if the Green Party says trans women are women in every circumstance, trans men are men in every circumstance. We have a problem over health services, for instance. How can the NHS send out calls to women to attend for cervical smears if they have on their books, on their records, that a trans woman is a woman? They will be calling trans women for a cervical smear that is not necessary, and not calling a trans man for whom a cervical smear might be necessary. That is basic advocating of responsibility for the health of the nation to me. So that's one of many, many instances where we have to recognise people's biological sex.
I mean, Mandy gave me a leaflet explaining more about Greens in Exile, and let's just say some of the language was, to put it kindly, I would say problematic. I mean, this leaflet makes claims of gender ideologues, which is the term that they used, being elected into positions of power within the party, and claimed that those people were abusing those positions to promote what the exiled called their ideology. And this group are adamant that they are just trying to have a genuine conversation about women's rights, and that their truth is that trans women cannot be women. So I spoke to Zach Polanski, deputy leader of the party, and I put this to him.
There has to be a further clause there, which is to tell the truth, but also to take the responsibility that comes with that, to make sure that when you're talking, there are red lines and that you're respecting people's identities and you're making sure that ultimately it's a respectful space for everyone. That does not mean you can't disagree. And in fact, in the party conference right now, there will be disagreements. There's going to be disagreements happening all weekend because we're a democratic party who are one member, one vote. And if you don't have disagreements, then why have you turned up? Because you already knew what the answers were. So that's really important. The second thing is, I can't talk about individual cases because of disciplinary processes, but I'd say more widely this: transphobia is never acceptable. We live in a society where they are some of the most marginalized people in our society, and are often left to feel unwelcome or at worst in danger of their life. So I've just given a speech about standing with marginalized communities and working with people, and we will always show solidarity with trans people. I'm not a woman, so it's not up to me to tell women how to feel or what to do. And so we've had lots of conversations in the past about how do we bring people together to have this conversation, and it can't be the responsibility of trans people to have to justify their own identities. But the other tricky bit is it can't be for someone who's not trans, albeit LGBT, to speak for trans people. They need to be in a space that they can speak for themselves. So there's often suggestions like citizens' assemblies and that kind of thing, and I think there's definitely something to be explored there. But I am also skeptical about the idea that trans people need to justify their existence. So for me, just to finish off, I think it comes down to red lines. And the big red line for me, and this is just personally speaking, is about misgendering. If you say that you are willing to have a conversation, you just want to have a conversation, that's great. But if you say within that conversation, I'm not even willing to give someone the courtesy to refer to them by the pronoun that they want to refer to, we can all make mistakes, including me. But if it is purposeful and it's repetitive, then that is clearly harassment.
I mean, you know, clearly Zach's right there. I mean, it's one thing to say you want to have a conversation about women's safety, but if that conversation involves refusing to acknowledge that trans women are women and trans men are men, then surely there's a problem. What do you think?
I mean, what it speaks to is this kind of utilitarian gap between people on the right and people on the left. Gender critical ideology is fundamentally a conservative one, which believes that things are just so, and making certain exceptions which have broad utilitarian ends is not something they will countenance because they believe it goes against what they perceive to be the truth. So, and even then, even with inside of that, some of the things that person from that clip that you showed earlier, it belies the fact that they just don't understand what they're talking about a lot of the time. Or saying gender ideology is something that exists is like saying that gravity ideology exists. Gender has been something that's been observed as part of human societies for millennia, since the inception of humanity, really. There's something there's sociologists, which is a science in itself, have studied for a very, very long time the concept of gender within human societies. It's obviously been changing a lot of the time. It's clearly been something that throughout different existences of human societies has been different for each one. And to try and say that, oh, well, gender ideology is a thing means that the gender identity as a concept is only something that is the purview of this ideology. Nonsense. Complete nonsense. And the second thing she said, oh, well, actually, the NHS can't do things properly if we don't refer to people by their own biological sex or whatever. But the NHS tried to change this to make it more utilitarian by referring to just saying, well, if you are somebody who needs these certain things like a cervical smear because you have a uterus, which is clearly the best utilitarian policy because it means everybody knows which one that they are applicable for. And so we'll get the right checkup that they need, or we'll look for the right services they need within the NHS. When the NHS tried to do that, they still kicked up a shit fit. They still said, oh, you're erasing women by saying people who have a cervix need to go and get a cervical smear. Because fundamentally, it's not actually about, well, if the NHS does these things wrong, that's going to lead to a lack of service provision. No, it's about it coddling their feelings in the best way possible rather than reaching the best utilitarian ends. And that's the problem that they have, is that they will try and couch their language behind, well, if we do this thing, that will lead to this bad thing happening. And I'm like, well, we have this alternative solution that makes everything best for everybody. And they say, oh no, I don't like it because make it sounds bad. To use another corollary on this, when it came to the prison problem, if you explain to them, well, actually, in the way that we do things at the moment, some trans women go to women's prisons, others go to men's prisons because they are deemed to be so much of a threat. We have this discussion period, we have this evaluation period to decide which prison somebody should go to. And then because they say, well, the problem is that the trans women are going to be a danger to women in women's prisons. I'm like, well, some of them might be, but we make that evaluation. When you put this point to them, they say, well, no, we can't do this at all. Because actually, fundamentally, it isn't about the women's safety in the prisons they care about. It's the fact that the prison has the word women up the top. And fundamentally, it disagrees with their own personal belief of what a woman is and what a woman isn't. Beliefs that they're entitled to 100%. But when it comes into conflict with how we write laws, how we create the best utilitarian ends out of the way in which we approach policy, this is where we have to have these disagreements.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, do you think, because a lot of the people that I was speaking to seemed to think that the party was just not allowing those conversations. I mean, you've said it yourself, you know, we need to be able to have conversations, especially with people with these beliefs, because if we can't talk about it, then we can't educate people and they're not going to change their mind. And there was certainly some within the group of Greens in Exile that believe that the Green Party are essentially just completely silencing any debate at all. I mean, I wonder whether, you might not agree with me, but I felt that this was almost similar to the anti-Semitism problem in the Labour Party, whereby we knew that there were people who were anti-Semites, but equally there were people who weren't, who just wanted to have a conversation, that were accused of it. And I couldn't help but wonder, from talking to some of the people, and don't get me wrong, some of the people that I was speaking to out there were clearly transphobic, like there was no hiding that. But some of them, it seemed a lot more complicated. And I wonder whether the Green Party are just, because they you know, they're trying to make sure that they stamp out the transphobia that exists. I wonder whether they're maybe just going a little bit too far with it, and they're just silencing anyone that even wants to have a conversation about gender. I mean, like you said, the comments that were made by the health spokesperson, they weren't the worst.
Yeah, so I fundamentally agree with Zach Polanski on this. Red lines is what's important. Finding the red line and establishing clearly where that red line is. So, for example, I can tell you exactly where that red line is. That's going to come from an iterative process. But right, let's take these two situations. First of all, there was this healthcare spokesperson. I don't think that anything she said was so beyond the pale that it warranted a suspension, personally, in my opinion. Other people may disagree. I don't personally think that, and I think we can have a conversation and try and find out where the point lies and try and win this person round and try and bring them into the fold. On the other hand, for example, there was the previous candidate for Sheffield Central, who in my personal opinion, had said things that were fundamentally transphobic in every possible sense of the word. This is my honest opinion. And I think that her removal as the candidate for Sheffield Central was absolutely the right thing to do. It's just like, as you say, when it comes to the anti-Semitism thing within Labour, where I think plenty of people were unfairly removed from the party over questions around their opposition to Zionism or questions around Israel, or maybe they had said something in error that could be rectified by having a conversation with them. But there are some red lines that shouldn't be crossed, like the red line with Azhar Ali being unsupported as the candidate in Rochdale for being an October the 7th truther, right? Like, that should be a line where I think it's reasonable to get rid of candidates. Like, I'm not opposed fundamentally to getting rid of candidates or suspending members if they cross those red lines. It's just that you get really trigger happy if you make the red line not, if you're too judicious in where you put that red line and how many people that you suspend, how many people that you excise rather than try and educate or win round. And that's a complex process. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but
no, it definitely is complex. And I do have to wonder, you know, how we get to that, because it seems from certainly the perspectives of some of those that were protesting outside that's all they've tried to do, is to have that conversation. And it appears that there's some sort of silencing going on even at that point. So no, I agree. I think it's important. We need to know where the red line is, and we can't do that if we don't have a conversation on it. But listen, I could talk
Exactly.
about
One
this
last point.
all
One
day.
last
Yeah, go on.
point on this one. One last very specific point on this one as well is that, as well as if you don't have these conversations, when it comes to like borderline stuff, like we saw with this healthcare spokesperson, the comments about mischievous reporting of hate crimes, for example, that could quite clearly underlie a personal level of transphobia by thinking that this is project to make up anti-trans hate statistics to be able to push forward gender ideology. But we don't know whether she believes that or not based off that statement. If you allow people into the discussion to have those conversations, we may end up getting to the point where they actually reveal these are legitimate opinions, because that's what happened to J.K. Rowling. It was, first of all, it was a senior person moment, and then it became, actually, I'm a virulent transphobe. But if you just get rid of people for small things, they become martyrs rather than allowing them to properly elucidate their full opinion.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.